On May 12, 1974, a high school teacher and one student left the same classroom and never made it home. Their desks were found neat, their coats still on the hooks. Written on the chalkboard in careful cursive were 4 words: class dismissed for good. For 50 years, no one could explain what happened inside room 2B of Brantford Union High, until now. I'm Emma Lane, investigative journalist, and in tonight's episode we reopen the file the county tried to bury. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because in Brantford, history doesn't stay erased. Someone keeps rewriting it. The school stood at the end of Hollis Road, brick the color of dried blood, windows papered with tape from storms that never came. For years, the building had been empty, except for birds nesting in the eaves and the occasional trespassing teen, daring someone to write their name on the blackboard in 2B. In the summer of 2024, when demolition crews arrived, they found the room sealed behind a false wall of plywood. When they pried it loose, dust poured out like breath held too long. The chalkboard still stood intact, a single white line drawn across it, a border or a horizon. Inside a box near the teacher's desk were 15 confiscated essays, dated April 1974, each beginning with the same assignment: describe something that refuses to die. Under the papers lay a Polaroid photograph that should not have existed. It showed Margaret Keene, the vanished English teacher, and beside her, a boy in a denim jacket, the missing student, Brian Caldwell. Both faced the camera, smiling faintly, but behind them, on the board, the chalk line curved upward like a pulse, and a third shadow stretched between them, longer than it should have been, darker than any trick of light. When Emma Lane saw the photograph for the first time, she thought it looked posed, staged. Then she noticed the smear of chalk on Brian's wrist, fresh, as if the picture had been taken seconds before they disappeared. Emma Lane had driven through half the state before realizing she'd been following the same 2-lane highway that Margaret Keene once took to school. The road curled through soy fields gone to stubble, past houses that seemed permanently half-renovated. 49 years of silence clung to Brantford like mildew. She arrived on a Wednesday, rain streaking her windshield, the kind that blurred distance but not memory. Her editor wanted a short anniversary piece. Old mystery, local color, good SEO. But Emma's reasons ran deeper. Her mother had been in Keene's class, seated 2 desks from Brian Caldwell. She'd never talked about that day, only said the bell rang twice. The motel clerk recognized Emma's name from her booking and asked if she was here for the ghosts. When she didn't answer, he pointed toward the dark ridge beyond town. They're taking down the school tomorrow. Folks figure it's safer that way. That night, Emma spread her research across the bedspread, photocopied police reports, yellowed attendance logs, the single surviving photo of Margaret Keene, a woman in her early 30s, hair pinned neatly, expression cautious, as if already aware history was watching. The file noted no signs of struggle, no forced entry, and an odd detail: chalk residue under the fingernails of both missing persons, found on a desk drawer. The next morning, the demolition site buzzed with machinery. She flashed her press badge to the foreman, who shrugged and let her through. Inside room 2B, dust hung thick as fog. The chalk line stretched across the board, clean, unbroken. She lifted her phone to film, narrating quietly, reflex of habit. Room 2B, Brantford Union High, site of the 1974 disappearance of Margaret Keene and Brian Caldwell. Board preserved, untouched. Her voice echoed too sharply. The acoustics felt wrong, as though the room were smaller than it looked. In the corner where the teacher's desk once stood, the floor dipped slightly. Beneath the warped linoleum, she heard a faint hollow tap when her boot struck. She crouched, tracing the outline. A loose tile. She pried it up with her car key. Beneath, A recess the size of a shoebox held a thin envelope wrapped in wax paper. Inside were photographs, students on a field trip, laughing, and a single audio reel labeled May 12th, 1974. End of term. Her pulse stuttered. The reel smelled of chalk and iron. She pocketed it and filmed a close-up for her notes. By evening, she was in her motel again, the reel spinning on a borrowed player from the Historical Society. Static filled the room. Then the soft murmur of a classroom, chairs scraping, distant laughter. Margaret Keene's voice came through, warm, measured. Write your final line, class. Remember, every story ends where it began. A pause. Then Brian Caldwell's voice, faint. Mrs. Keene, the chalk won't stop. It keeps going. A crash followed. A desk tipping, the scrape of metal. And then nothing but a low, rhythmic sound, like breathing through walls. Emma sat motionless long after the reel ended. Outside, rain began again, tapping against the glass in slow, deliberate beats. She replayed the tape once more, certain she could hear, under the static, someone whispering the same 4 words written on the board. Class dismissed for good. By morning the rain had stopped, but the clouds still sat heavy over Brantford, thick as unspoken things. Emma left the motel early, reel-to-reel recorder packed carefully in her trunk. She drove to the town's small records office, a squat brick building that smelled of varnish and old paper. The clerk, a tired woman named Mara Dempsey, glanced up from her coffee. "You're the reporter." "Not a question." Emma nodded. "I'm reopening the Keene-Caldwell case." The woman's mouth tightened. "Nothing to reopen. They ran off. Everyone knows that." Emma slid her press badge across the counter and spoke softly. "Then it won't hurt to prove it." After a long pause, Mara disappeared into the stacks and returned with a box labeled BUHS, Personnel, 1973-75. The cardboard was brittle, the tape flaking. Inside were pay stubs, teacher evaluations, and a sealed envelope stamped Internal Review, Confidential. Mara hesitated. "I shouldn't. I won't quote you." The clerk sighed and slid the envelope forward. Inside were memos about complaints filed against Margaret Keene, notes on unconventional teaching methods, and inappropriate boundary-crossing assignments. Most of the letters were unsigned. One line was underlined in red pencil. "Encourages students to write about death as release." Emma felt the tug of skepticism. Every scandalized small town rewrote its ghosts as sins, but the file carried something deeper. The final memo was dated May 10th, 1974, 2 days before the disappearances. Meeting scheduled with M. Keene regarding disciplinary review. Principal C. Reddick. She circled the name. Outside, Brantford's main street looked frozen in a half-century-old photograph. Barbershop closed, cafe open but empty. A single school bus rusting in a lot overtaken by weeds. Emma drove to the retired principal's address from the file. Cecil Reddick lived in a narrow house near the old quarry. His porch sagged under the weight of decades. When Emma introduced herself, he laughed softly, an old man's dry exhale. "Reporters again, every decade like clockwork. I found your review notes, Mr. Reddick." He nodded toward the rocking chair opposite him. "Then you know she was troubled." "Or that the school was." He smiled without warmth. "You sound like her." The wind rattled the chimes. She pressed gently. "You met her 2 days before she vanished?" Reddick's gaze drifted across the yard. "She came into my office late, after class. Said the students were hearing things in the walls. Thought it was a joke at first. She wasn't laughing. Said the chalk moved on its own. That a boy, Brian, stayed after to see it. She said she needed the janitor's keys to the basement. Did you give them?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but someone did." Emma noted the tremor in his hands, the way his fingers traced invisible lines on the armrest. "Who?" "Ask her husband." She blinked. "Margaret Keene was married?" "Separated. He built houses east of town. poured half the school's foundation himself. Reddick's eyes narrowed. He told me once a foundation's only as strong as what you bury under it. By afternoon, Emma was driving along the ridge road toward the Lake Estates. The Keene property sat empty, half-collapsed porch, mailbox rusted shut. She found the husband listed in county records. Tom Keene, deceased 2012. But his workshop still stood. Inside, dust coated every surface. On the wall hung blueprints for school expansions, rooms numbered in faded ink. She spread one across the workbench. Room 2B's floor plan was slightly off. Beneath the chalkboard ran a narrow shaft, labeled simply Service Tunnel A, as if the board itself needed somewhere for its story to drain. She photographed it, heart quickening. A faint sound echoed from somewhere beneath the floor, a slow, rhythmic tapping, as if from metal cooling. She froze, crouched, listening. Tap, pause, tap, tap. A pattern, deliberate. She recorded 30 seconds on her phone before retreating outside. The air felt heavier, dense with the scent of rain and iron. That evening she sent the audio clip to her producer, Mark, in Chicago. He called within minutes. I ran it through a spectrogram. You're going to want to see this. She watched the file upload, the waveform unfolding like a pulse. Embedded in the frequency peaks, faint but clear, were letters drawn in chalk-white lines. B-R-I-A-N. Emma shut the laptop slowly, the motel's fluorescent light flickering overhead. Somewhere outside, a train passed, its whistle echoing like a voice carried too far to name. The next morning brought the kind of fog that didn't burn off, only thickened into daylight. Emma parked outside Brantford Union High's fenced demolition zone and watched the slow crawl of backhoes against the gray horizon. Somewhere beyond that mist lay the service tunnel she'd seen on the blueprint. She was still thinking about the spectrogram from the night before. B-R-I-A-N. Coincidence, maybe. Or the kind of pareidolia that haunted people who listened too long to ghosts on tape. But she knew better than to dismiss patterns. She found the town's maintenance office behind the water tower, a squat concrete block that smelled of oil and bleach. A single light glowed inside. The door creaked when she entered. A man in his 70s looked up from a radio. His coveralls read L-E-N-R-O-W-E-S. "Reporter still picking bones," he said. His voice carried gravel and cigarette years. "I'm not here for bones," she answered. "You worked at the school in '74. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Worked everywhere back then. What do you want?" "A key." Or a story. He studied her a long moment, then opened a drawer and produced a rusted ring of keys. They don't open much anymore. One was marked Tunnel A. He held it between two fingers. "That what you're after?" Emma nodded. "Tell me about it." He leaned back, chair creaking. "There's a crawl space runs under the classrooms, ducts and wiring. Nobody's supposed to go down there. Flooded easy, bad air. Keene asked for access that spring. Said she lost something. I told her I'd go with her. She said no, private. What did she lose?" "Her student." He looked past her toward the fogged window. "They were both down there when the alarm went off. By the time we got the hatch open, nothing but chalk dust in the air. We filled it in the next week. Cemented it shut." "Who ordered that?" "Reddick. Said it was unsafe." He slid the key across the desk. "Won't matter. They poured over it again in '90. Gym extension. Ground doesn't forget, though." Outside, Emma stood in the parking lot, turning the key over in her hand. The metal was cold, edges worn smooth. She could almost feel the weight of the years pressing through it. By late afternoon, she was back at the site. The crew had gone for the day. Caution tape fluttered like warning ribbons in the wind. She slipped through a gap in the fence. Room 2B's remains were a skeleton of brick and plaster. Beneath the chalkboard, she found a square of newer concrete. Slightly darker, smoother. She crouched, brushing dust aside. The seam between old and new was thin as a scar. She tapped once with the butt of her flashlight. Hollow. She marked the spot with orange chalk from her bag, then returned to her car to fetch a small pry bar. Her hands shook as she wedged it into the crack. The concrete gave a reluctant groan. Beneath, a pocket of stale air hissed upward, cold, dry, almost metallic. A narrow gap opened, enough to peer through. Her flashlight beam cut down into darkness. A tunnel sloping beneath the school, walls of poured stone slick with condensation. Wires hung like vines. She lowered her recorder beside the light. June 7th, 2024. Entry point, room 2B subfloor. Possible original service tunnel. Then, faintly, a sound answered. Distant, rhythmic. The same pulse she'd heard on the tape. Not quite machinery. Not quite breath. She leaned closer. Something glimmered below. A fragment of metal half buried in silt. It took 2 hours to widen the hole enough to climb through. Her flashlight flickered across narrow walls, scored with white residue. Chalk smeared by hands long gone. 20 feet in, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. On the far wall, chalk residue had gathered itself into words. Write it down. Emma's throat tightened. A small object lay in the corner. A student's notebook, cover swollen with damp. She knelt and opened it carefully. The pages were mostly blank except for one dated entry in cramped handwriting. May 11th, 1974. Mrs. Keene says the chalk keeps drawing after we stop. Says it's the story writing itself. She told me not to tell the others. The last line slanted off the page, as if the pencil had been pulled from the writer's hand. She photographed every page, heart hammering. When she looked up, her light caught movement, a ripple through the dust. Air shifting behind her. She turned the beam toward the entry shaft. Someone stood above, silhouetted against the dim evening light. A man's voice, low, calm. "Ma'am, you're trespassing." It was the deputy she'd seen guarding the site the first day, badge glinting. "You need to come up now." She hesitated, unwilling to leave the notebook. He extended a hand. "These tunnels aren't safe." When she reached the surface, the deputy's tone changed. "What were you looking for?" "Truth," she said. He studied her a beat longer than necessary. "Truth gets people buried around here." Then he walked her to the fence, his hand heavy on her shoulder. Back in her car, she replayed the new recording. The hum was clearer this time, pulsing in measured intervals. Between beats, a whisper threaded through the static, childlike, echoing. "Don't erase it." She sat in the dark lot until the fog thickened again, the key from Rose cold in her palm, the word erase looping in her mind like a promise. Emma drove north to the state forensic lab, the notebook sealed in an evidence bag on the passenger seat. Morning light turned the mist to thin gold, but it didn't feel like daybreak so much as a pause between shadows. The hum from her tunnel recording still played in her head, steady as a second heartbeat. At the lab, she met Dr. Hallstrom, a geochemist she'd worked with on old homicide projects. He was lean, gray-bearded, his voice the dry patience of a man used to silence. When she slid the bag across the counter, he raised an eyebrow. "You're bringing me a 49-year-old piece of paper." "Just test the chalk dust," she said. "I need composition, anything unusual." He brushed a sample onto a slide, peering through the scope. Minutes passed, his brow creasing deeper. "It's calcium carbonate," he said slowly, "but not the school kind. Grains too fine, there's binding residue, like something biological mixed in. Collagen traces bone?" He nodded once. "Or something trying to be bone." The words chilled her more than she expected. She asked him to run isotope tests. He agreed, but warned it could take days. She left her number and drove back to Brantford, the afternoon thick with heat and unfinished thoughts. At the diner, she found the only open stool beside the window. The waitress poured coffee without asking. "You're that reporter," she said. "Digging up the Keene thing." Emma looked up. You remember it? Hard not to. My mom had her class that year, said the woman loved words too much. Made the kids write their secrets on the blackboard and wipe them clean at the bell. Emma stirred her coffee. And Brian Caldwell. The waitress hesitated. Nice kid. Kept to himself. Stayed after for extra credit, she said. Folks whispered. What kind of whispers? Same kind they always do when something don't fit the picture. She refilled a cup, eyes distant. I was 8. That week the chalkboards at our school started cracking down the middle, like they were tired. Outside, a freight train rolled past, shaking the glass. Emma watched its reflection slide over her face, ghosting her features with the blur of distance. When she returned to the motel that night, a padded envelope waited at her door. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape and a short note typed on an old ribbon machine. Stop before you open the floor again. Her pulse quickened. She slid the tape into her recorder. Static. Then a voice. Male, weary, recorded decades earlier. If anyone hears this, they'll tell you she wasn't right after the boy disappeared. But she was trying to save them. The walls were already breathing by then. Click. End of tape. She rewound, pressed play again, straining for background noise. This time she caught it. The same rhythmic hum, faint under the voice, identical to the sound from the tunnel. The next morning she called Hallstrom. What did you find? Still processing. But there's something else. You said this was chalk dust. It fluoresces under UV like marrow. And the isotopes? They match human origin, but the age? He stopped. It's modern, Emma. Less than 5 years old. Her grip tightened on the phone. That can't be. I ran it twice. She drove to the station to confront the deputy who'd pulled her from the tunnel. His nameplate read Agryer. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, steady eyes. You poured that tunnel over again, she said. Recently, he frowned. We capped sections last year, sinkholes. Why? Because the chalk I found down there isn't from 1974. Someone's been writing under that floor. He stared at her a moment too long. That area's condemned for a reason. Leave it alone or what? His voice softened. Not a threat, but a warning. You don't want to meet the kind of people who keep a town standing this long. That night, thunder crawled over Brantford. Power flickered twice. Emma spread her photos across the motel bed. Margaret Keene's smile, the notebook, the blueprint, the word right faintly visible in chalk. She traced the line connecting them. Teacher, student, foundation. A loop that only existed because someone kept writing it down. When lightning flashed outside, she saw something new in the photo of room 2B. The chalk line wasn't level. It curved slightly upward, like a graph rising toward a peak. She pulled out a ruler, measured angle and spacing, then overlaid the image with a digital spectrogram of the hum from her tape. They matched perfectly. The chalk line was a waveform, a recording written in dust. She whispered to the empty room, "What were you trying to say, Margaret?" Another flash answered, followed by a knock at her door. Soft, measured. She froze, checking the clock. 11:47 p.m. The knock came again. When she opened the door, no one stood there. Only a piece of folded paper on the mat, edges damp from rain. On it, written in faded chalk dust, "The next lesson begins below." Her reflection stared back from the motel window, pale and uncertain, as if already part of the photograph she'd been chasing. By morning, the rain had hardened into a fine sleet that stung against Emma's windshield. The town of Brantford looked like a photograph left too long in chemical wash, colors bleached, edges curling in on themselves. She arrived at the municipal office with 2 cups of coffee and a single request: temporary site access. The clerk, a young man barely out of college, squinted at her press badge and shook his head. "Demolition site's off limits." "I'm not asking to rebuild the place," Emma said, "just to document it." The sound of her own voice surprised her, steady, controlled, but lined with exhaustion. She slid the audio sample report from Dr. Hallstrom across the counter. The highlighted section read, "Human calcium trace. Modern origin." The clerk's eyes flicked over it. "You should take that to Sheriff Reddick." "I did," she lied. "He approved the review." He hesitated, then handed her a keyring tagged sub-level access. 72 hours. Outside, she exhaled hard. The lie had come too easily. By noon, she was back at Brantford Union's ruins. The fog had lifted, revealing a pit where the classrooms used to stand. 2 portable generators hummed by the fence, floodlights throwing white beams into the hole like interrogation lamps. Deputy Greer was already there. "You again," he muttered, taking her permit. "You know, most folks dig up dirt. You dig up ghosts. They're the same thing in this town," she said. He studied her a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. You've got an hour." She descended the cracked concrete steps leading to the sub-level. Each footstep echoed in a long, hollow rhythm, the sound of an old building remembering itself. At the base of the stairs, she unlocked the hatch with the new key. Metal shrieked against metal. Cold air rose from below, damp, sour, laced with something faintly organic. She turned on her recorder. June 9th, 2024. Sub-level access confirmed beneath room 2B. The beam of her flashlight caught the chalk markings she'd found before, but now there were more. Fresh lines trailing deeper into the tunnel. She followed them, her breath clouding in the cold. The passage narrowed, curving sharply. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Then the walls opened into a low chamber, circular, the floor half flooded. The chalk lines converged here, looping in precise spirals, meeting at the base of an old metal chair bolted to the floor. A rusted teaching stool. She approached slowly, crouching to inspect it. The floor around it was coated in a fine white film, as if something had evaporated mid-lesson. Embedded in the residue was a single metal object. A ring. Gold band, initials inside, MK. Emma's pulse quickened. Margaret Keene's ring. She photographed everything, then noticed the far wall, another chalk scrawl, faint but deliberate. "I didn't take him." "I followed him." Her light wavered. The words seemed to pulse faintly, breathing with the air. She stepped back, heart hammering. A faint vibration rose beneath her boots. The hum again, deeper this time, as if the tunnel itself remembered the sound. Then, behind her, a splash. She turned. The water rippled in slow, concentric waves, though nothing had fallen in. The recorder on her jacket clicked twice and switched itself off. The hum grew louder, resolving into something almost human. Syllables forming, falling apart, forming again. She forced herself to whisper, "Brian?" The hum broke like static. Then a single phrase whispered through the chamber. "Lesson 2. The water stilled. Her knees felt weak as she climbed back up. Ring clutched in her pocket. When she reached the surface, Greer was waiting beside her car, arms crossed. "You weren't supposed to go past the first corridor." "There's another chamber," she said. "You should see it." He didn't move. "You found something down there, didn't you?" "A ring. Her initials." "You want to log it?" He took the evidence bag, studied it briefly, then slid it into his jacket instead of the collection box. "You didn't see me take this," he said. Her jaw tightened. "What are you covering, Deputy?" He looked out toward the fog. "You think this started with a missing teacher and kid, but it didn't. There were others. Before the school, others?" He nodded toward the North Ridge. "Old chalk quarry. Shut down in the 60s. They used to say the rock there grew softer every year, like something under it was breathing." The wind picked up, fluttering the caution tape. He met her eyes one last time. "If you keep digging, you'll find the town's real foundation. Just make sure you're ready to live under it." That night, Emma sat in her motel room, staring at the ring on her desk. The initials had worn almost smooth, but the engraving line cut deeper than it should, as if etched by something stronger than human hands. She played back her recording. Between the crackles of static, she caught faint whispering again. Only one word was clear this time. Below. She wrote it down on the motel notepad, chalked a small circle around it, and whispered to the dark, "I'm coming." Outside, thunder cracked over the quarry ridge, and for a heartbeat, the lights of Brantford flickered in perfect rhythm, like something beneath the town was keeping time. The road to the Brantford chalk quarry hadn't been maintained since the Carter administration. Weeds grew through what remained of the asphalt, and the air carried that strange mix of limestone dust and wet rot, like the breath of something that had been sleeping too long. Emma parked by the old way station, the no trespassing sign half-eaten by rust. The morning light was colorless, a ghosted wash across the valley. The quarry pit stretched beyond her view, an enormous wound in the earth, its walls carved in steps that vanished into fog. She'd spent most of the night combing archives online. Before the quarry shut down in 1968, 4 workers had gone missing within a single year. Each case had been ruled industrial accidents. No bodies ever found. No formal investigation. She started down the main ramp, recorder clipped to her jacket, flashlight in one hand. Water pooled in low spots, reflecting the white cliffs like an unbroken sheet of glass. At the base, a network of tunnels opened into the walls, horizontal shafts where chalk had once been cut in slabs. The air grew colder with every step. She stopped to examine a pile of discarded tools half buried in silt. One had a name scratched into the handle, B. Caldwell. Her pulse stumbled. A faint echo drifted down the tunnel. 2 notes, then a pause. Not quite human. She called out softly, "Brian." No answer, only the long sigh of air through the stone. She continued forward. The walls bore strange markings, not quarry measurements, but faint chalk drawings, curved lines, spirals, and what looked like letters rubbed away by time. At one turn, she found a signature still legible. M. Keene, April 3rd, 74. Beneath it, a smaller hand had written, "I can hear it too." The beam of her light trembled. At the tunnel's end, she discovered a door, a heavy steel panel welded into the chalk wall. A warning sign hung crookedly. Substructure 1 closed since 1968. She tested the handle, locked. She crouched, sweeping her light along the base. The seam between metal and chalk was filled with a white residue. She touched it gently. Soft, not chalk at all. Something gelatinous, like the paste she'd seen on the floor of the sublevel. She stood back and pressed record. June 10th, 2024. Brantford Quarry, Substructure 1. Surface seal compound matches biological chalk traces found at the school site. Possible same origin. A low vibration traveled through the floor. Dust sifted from the ceiling in soft spirals. The door gave a small metallic groan, as if something inside had just shifted. She turned to go, and stopped. Someone was standing in the tunnel mouth behind her. A man's outline, backlit by daylight, motionless. "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer. Then it stepped forward, and she recognized the shape of the deputy's jacket, badge glinting dull silver. "Greer?" He nodded once. "I figured you'd come here." She tried to steady her voice. "How did you find me?" "Sheriff's office tracks all key sign-outs." He looked past her at the sealed door. "You shouldn't be down here." "I could say the same for you." He approached slowly, his face unreadable in the half-light. "Do you know why they built the school where they did?" "It was the only flat ground left," she said automatically. He smiled thinly. "That's what the papers said. Truth is, it was cheap because the quarry had started sinking. They filled the pit with rubble, poured a new foundation right over the cracks, Same cracks that run under half the town. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the bagged ring she'd given him. Found the match to this. He handed her a second ring. Identical engraving, only smaller. B. C. Her throat tightened. Where did you get this? Pulled it from the drain at the substation last week. Water main broke under the gym floor. Guess what color the runoff was? She didn't answer. He did it for her. White. He stepped closer. You think you're uncovering a mystery, but what you're really doing is waking it up. The ground shuddered beneath them, a quick tremor that made the flashlight jump in her hand. From behind the steel door came a sound, a deep, wet exhale. Greer's eyes widened. We have to go. They ran for the ramp, the vibration growing, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat amplified through stone. Halfway up, water surged from the shaft, milky and cold, carrying with it fragments of something pale, slivers that glistened like teeth. When they reached the surface, the noise stopped. The fog had thickened, swallowing the quarry's edge. Only the white water below still moved, swirling gently, as if exhaling. Greer wiped his face with a shaking hand. You see now why Reddick wants it filled? What's behind that door? She asked. He looked at her, the exhaustion in his eyes deeper than fear. The first pour, he said quietly. The one that never really set. That night, Emma sat in her car overlooking the valley. The lights of Brantford twinkled faintly beneath her, but something about their arrangement bothered her. Too ordered, too deliberate. She traced them on her notepad, marking each glow where it lay along the grid. The pattern matched the chalk spirals from the tunnel. The town itself was a map, and somewhere in the center of that map was the school. She stared down at the darkened valley and whispered the words from the tunnel wall. I didn't take him. I followed him. A cold wind carried the faint smell of limestone and rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Not from the sky, but from beneath the ground. Emma woke to the rattle of rain against her window and the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Hallstrom. Emma. His voice crackled through the line. You asked for age dating on the collagen traces. They're not just modern, they're regenerating. She sat upright. Meaning? Meaning the sample's cells show recent replication. Something down there is still alive. The call cut off. She dressed quickly, heart hammering, and drove straight to the Brantford County Courthouse, a stone building that looked embalmed in its own history. If the quarry was the town's body, this place was its memory. Inside, she asked for sealed cases from 1975. The clerk, an older man with nicotine-stained fingers, looked her over skeptically. You a lawyer? Journalist, freelance. He sighed and disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he carried a single gray box labeled State vs. Keene, Margaret Ann, sealed. You didn't get this from me, he said quietly. The file was brittle with age. Most pages were typewritten, smudged with carbon ink. She skimmed the summary. Charge: suspicion of child endangerment and obstruction in the disappearance of student Brian Caldwell. Disposition: defendant declared mentally unfit for trial. Case closed pending psychiatric review. There were only 2 exhibits left in the folder. The first, a photograph of a classroom chalkboard covered in phrases written over and over again. The line keeps growing. The line keeps growing. The second was a transcript excerpt from Keene's competency hearing. Prosecutor: Mrs. Keene, can you explain why you returned to the school at night? Keene: to listen. Prosecutor: to what exactly? Keene: to what's underneath. It keeps asking to be finished. Prosecutor: you mean the chalk line? Keene: I mean the foundation. Emma read the passage twice. There was no record of a verdict, no hospital report, nothing. Keene had simply vanished from the system after that day. She photocopied everything and drove to the county records annex. The receptionist there, a woman in her 60s, paused when Emma asked about Keene. "You're not the first to come asking," she said. "Some guy came by last month. Said he was with state infrastructure, asked for the same file. Name?" The woman frowned, searching her memory. "Greer, maybe?" Like your deputy friend, Emma felt the ground tilt under her. "Did he take anything?" "Microfilm copy." Paid cash back in her car, she sat still for a long time, rain ticking against the windshield. Greer had been inside this story longer than he'd let on. By evening, she was at the library scrolling through the local paper's 1974-1975 archives. The headline that caught her breath read, "Teacher declared unfit after classroom collapse." The accompanying photo showed the remains of room 2B, the chalkboard split in half, a woman's shoe lying amid the rubble. The caption named her Margaret Keene, age 32. Beneath the story was a single-paragraph update printed months later. Update, August 1975. Brantford Union High permanently closed following structural damage. Remaining staff reassigned. No further comment from council. Emma dug deeper into town council minutes. In one, Sheriff Reddick's name appeared next to a motion authorizing emergency foundation sealing under municipal supervision. Signed and seconded by Ezekiel Greer, Public Works. Her stomach dropped. The family name again. The deputy wasn't the first Greer to work the line. He was inheriting it. She pulled into his driveway after dark. His house sat on the edge of the ridge, porch light burning like a single cautious eye. He opened the door before she knocked. "You should stop," he said quietly. "Your grandfather poured the line," she countered. "Didn't he?" He said nothing. "I read the court records." Margaret Keene wasn't insane. She was trying to warn people. She was part of it, he said flatly. They all were. Every generation someone keeps the ground quiet. My family poured, hers taught, the Caldwells built. You think those names repeating are coincidence? He stepped aside. "You want to see the truth? Fine, come in." Inside, his living room walls were lined with maps, blueprints, survey overlays, photographs of the quarry and the town grid layered together like arteries. In the center, a single line ran through all of them in white chalk. It connected every site she'd visited. At its northern end was the courthouse. Emma's voice came out a whisper. "It's still expanding." He nodded slowly. "And it always starts the same way. Someone hears the hum, someone writes it down, and the town pretends not to notice." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were yellowed photos, grainy, taken during Keene's hearing. One showed her in the courtroom, hands clasped, a faint chalk streak across her cheek. Another showed the evidence exhibit, a small glass jar filled with chalk dust labeled Foundation Sample A. The note beneath read, "Specimen continues to grow when wet." Emma looked up. "Where is it now?" "Courthouse basement," he said. "Evidence locker 9. He met her eyes. "Whatever you do, don't open it." But by the time he finished speaking, she already knew she would. That night, lightning rolled over Brantford. She parked behind the courthouse and watched the rain streak down the old stone steps. Every instinct told her to leave the past where it was buried. But in her pocket, the recorder pulsed faintly against her palm, as if something inside it was breathing. She whispered to herself, the same words that had haunted her since the tunnel. Lesson 2. Then she stepped out into the rain. The courthouse was nearly empty by the time Emma returned. Rain had eased to a mist that made the stone steps shine under the streetlights. From outside, the building looked asleep, the kind of sleep that only comes after a lifetime of keeping secrets. She slipped through the service entrance, the one used by maintenance staff, and followed the corridor toward the archives. Her flashlight beam trembled across framed photographs of former judges, each one staring down with eyes like dark mirrors. At the end of the hall, a steel door bore the faded stenciling, "Evidence storage. Authorized personnel only." The lock looked old, the kind meant to intimidate rather than protect. She jimmied it with the key Greer had once used to let her into the sub-level. The tumblers gave way with a tired click. The air inside was stale, tinged with paper dust and something faintly metallic. Rows of cabinets stretched out like pews in a forgotten chapel. She traced the numbers until she reached locker 9. Her hand shook as she turned the latch. Inside sat a small glass jar sealed with wax. The label had browned with age, but the handwriting was still legible. Foundation Sample A, Keene, 1975. The contents looked ordinary, a layer of pale dust clinging to the bottom. But when her light hit it, something shimmered beneath the surface. Not reflection, movement. She lifted the jar carefully. It was warm. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard it. A low hum, so faint she couldn't tell if it came from the jar or her own pulse. The door creaked behind her. "Emma," a voice said quietly. "Put it down." She spun. Greer stood in the doorway, rain still dripping from his coat. "How did you—" He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the jar. "You think I'd let you come here alone?" "I told you not to open that thing. I haven't," she said, though her fingers were already working at the wax seal. "Don't," he warned. "That sample's why Keene lost her mind. She said it was listening. She wasn't insane. She knew this town was built on something living." He reached for the jar, but she stepped back. The wax cracked softly under her thumb. A faint hiss of air escaped, dry and cold. The chalk dust inside rippled like breath. "Stop," he said again, but too late. The lid came free with a whisper of suction. The humming filled the room instantly, deeper now, resonant enough to vibrate the glass cases. Papers fluttered from shelves as if stirred by a passing train. Greer lunged forward and slammed the lid back on, sealing it with his palm. The sound died, leaving a hollow silence that felt worse than noise. They both stood there, breathing hard. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the far wall, where the condensation on the metal had traced faint shapes. Lines, looping and intersecting. The same chalk pattern from the school tunnel, now forming in water. He turned back to her. "You woke it up again." "I just opened—" "You finished what she started," he cut in. Keene was trying to trap it. She thought if she wrote its name, it would stay quiet. "What name?" Emma demanded. He hesitated. She never said it aloud. She called it the line that remembers they carried the jar to the central table. Under the light, the dust inside looked different now, forming a distinct curve, almost like a waveform, frozen mid-sound. "Help me photograph this," Emma said. "No," Greer snapped. "We destroy it." He reached for the jar again, but she pulled it away. "If we destroy it, we lose proof." "Proof of what? That the town's built on a grave that breathes? You think anyone will believe you? They'll bury you with it." The lights flickered. A low tremor rolled under the floor, followed by the muffled sound of something shifting in the foundation, a groan deep enough to make the glass rattle. Greer swore under his breath. "It's spreading again. We have to contain it before it reaches the ridge." "How?" she asked. He met her eyes, fear erasing whatever defiance he'd had left. "There's a hatch under the courtroom. It connects to the old drainage vault, same chamber where Keene's hearing took place. That's where she poured the first seal." He started toward the door. "Bring the jar. We end it there." They crossed the empty courthouse, footsteps echoing against marble. The main courtroom loomed ahead, benches draped in plastic, the judge's dais dusted with neglect. Greer lifted a section of floor paneling near the witness stand, revealing a square hatch secured by an iron ring. Together they heaved it open. A rush of cold air swept up from below, carrying the smell of damp stone. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. "After you," he said. She hesitated only long enough to switch on her recorder. June 11th, 2024. Sub-level access. Courthouse vault. They descended. The steps spiraled down into a low chamber lined with concrete. At its center lay a circular platform, the same diameter as the chalk spirals she'd seen before. Faint residue glowed on the surface, pulsing softly in time with her heartbeat. Greer set the jar on the platform. This is where she sealed it. But she never finished. Emma knelt beside the jar. The hum started again, softer now, almost like words beneath the vibration. She strained to hear. It was saying her name. She glanced at Greer, but he was staring at the platform floor. Cracks were spreading from beneath the jar, delicate as veins. He whispered, "It knows you." The hum rose to a low roar. The jar's lid bulged outward, the wax seal melting as heat built inside. White light bled through the glass like liquid fire. Emma shouted, "Get back!" The jar burst. Dust billowed into the air, luminous, swirling in graceful patterns like handwriting on invisible paper. It formed lines across the walls, curling into the words, "Finish the lesson." Then the light went out. When Emma opened her eyes, Greer was gone. No splash, no scream, just an empty patch of floor where he had been standing. The chamber was silent except for the faint drip of water somewhere beyond the dark. She stood, coughing through the settling dust, and whispered into her recorder with a shaking voice. "Subject, Deputy Greer missing." Sample breached containment. Message appeared on vault wall. Directive unclear. She looked at the glowing residue, spelling out those words again. Then, beneath them, a new phrase formed, faint but deliberate. Letter by letter. Court reconvenes at dawn. Morning came pale and brittle, the sky a wash of bone-white cloud. Emma had driven all night, every radio station collapsing into static as she left Brantford Center behind. The courthouse loomed in her rearview mirror like a memory refusing to fade. She still saw the words glowing on the vault wall. Court reconvenes at dawn. When the sun finally broke through the fog, she found herself parked in front of the school's ruins again. Machines sat silent. The work site was deserted on Sundays. Yet someone had cleared the debris away from the old entrance, leaving the chalkboard exposed to the open air. The line across it, broken when she first saw it, had repaired itself overnight, a perfect horizon drawn by an unseen hand. She stepped from the car, recorder ready. June 12th, 2024, she whispered. "Sight appears altered." A voice answered from somewhere behind her. "Then let the record show we are in session." She froze. The sound came not as an echo but as a declaration, amplified through invisible speakers. Around her the air thickened, a shimmer like heat mirage. Desks reassembled themselves from dust. Windows blinked into place. The smell of chalk and floor wax replaced the scent of rain. For an instant, room 2B stood whole again. At the front of the class, the teacher's desk waited. Behind it sat Margaret Keene. Her posture was perfect, hands folded, hair pinned just as in the photographs, but her eyes were the color of damp limestone. When she spoke, the words carried both human breath and the hum of the quarry. "Miss Lane," she said evenly, "please take your seat. You're late for testimony." Emma's body refused to move, yet the room seemed to tilt until she found herself standing behind a student's desk, recorder trembling in her grip. "This isn't real," she managed. "Real enough to finish the record," Keene replied. "The court requires witness statements." Desks filled one by one, blurred shapes of former students, their faces made of dust and recollection. The far door opened, and Deputy Greer stepped in, his eyes vacant, uniform soaked as if he'd climbed from underwater. "The prosecution calls Brian Caldwell," Keene intoned. The room fell silent. A boy appeared near the chalkboard, barefoot, hair damp, denim jacket gray with silt. His voice was soft but steady. She tried to help, he said. The ground was already moving. She said the line was feeding Keen's expression didn't change. And what happened after class, Brian? He looked at Emma. We went below. She said the story had to end where it began. The hum swelled, papers lifting from the desks in slow spirals. Emma gripped the recorder tighter. What story? Brian smiled faintly. Ours. The hum deepened until it felt like the room itself had lungs. Emma's recorder picked up the vibration, each pulse leaving a faint tremor in the audiometer. She lifted it like a shield. Margaret Keene rose from behind the desk. The motion was graceful, practiced, like she was about to begin another lesson. Chalk dust swirled around her sleeves. You came looking for a culprit, she said, but the town chose long ago who would carry its silence. I only kept the line steady. Emma forced herself to her feet. You killed them. Your students, the boy. Keen's voice sharpened. No, I kept them from being erased. The ground wanted them. The quarry below this school breathes, Miss Lane. It remembers. Without the chalk line, it would have taken the whole valley. She crossed to the board and drew a fresh mark. The chalk squealed. A faint gold glow leaked from the groove, bleeding through the wall like backlit veins. Every generation draws it again, Keene murmured. Every generation forgets why. The desks shook. The students' outlines wavered. Their mouths opened soundlessly as if repeating her words. Emma stepped closer, whispering into her recorder, Subject exhibits dissociative delusion consistent with town-wide myth. The chalk broke. The sound cracked like thunder. The glow brightened until the classroom dissolved, floorboards turning to mud, windows to black sky. Emma stood ankle-deep in water. Keene remained, chalk stub clenched in her hand. "Do you know why the line curves?" she asked softly. "Because it's not drawn to separate. It's drawn to keep something in from the flooded floor. A shape rose. Human-sized, half-formed, coated in wet concrete. The face was Brian's, then not. It shifted through others. The missing students, the workers, even Keene herself. It opened its mouth, and dozens of voices poured out. "Finish the record." Emma staggered back. "I'm not part of this." Keene's smile was brittle. "Everyone who writes becomes part of it. Ink, chalk, concrete, it's all the same substance when it hardens." The water climbed her calves, warm and viscous. She grabbed the recorder, shouting into it. "If anyone finds this, school basement corresponds to—" Her words drowned in static as light flared from the board. The room folded inward, the glow collapsing to a single, narrow line. When she blinked, the desks were gone. Dawn light spilled through the empty frame of the school's facade. Rain hissed on broken concrete. She was alone again, kneeling before the chalkboard, the line across it now faintly smoking. Her phone chimed. A text from Detective Keene. Court order issued. Keene's remains found in sub-level vault. Autopsy pending. Emma's gaze slid to the board. The fresh line she'd seen moments ago had darkened to the color of dried blood. Beneath it, carved into the wood, were words that hadn't been there before. She kept the record. "Now you will." She pressed stop on the recorder, the red light flickering once before dying. Outside, the first siren wailed across town, and for the first time in 50 years, the courthouse bell answered it. The courthouse smelled of rain and plaster dust when the inquest began. Reporters crowded the corridor, their lenses fogged from the damp air. Emma stood at the back of the hearing room, recorder in hand, feeling the weight of every flash. The placard on the judge's bench read, State vs. Brantford Unified School District. 1974. Disappearance. Detective Keene motioned for her to sit. His coat dripped a dark line down the aisle. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "You're still a witness, not a party." "I found the vault," she said. "I need to hear what they do with it." At the front, The prosecutor, a gray-haired woman named Abbott, lifted a single photograph from the evidence file. The picture showed the chalkboard recovered from the ruins, the faint, glowing mark still visible under ultraviolet light. For 50 years, Abbott began, this town believed that 7 people simply vanished. Now we have proof that their teacher, Margaret Keene, maintained an unauthorized containment chamber beneath the school, directly over the old quarry network. A low murmur rippled through the benches. Emma felt it vibrate in her chest like the hum beneath the floorboards had. Abbott continued. When investigators broke through the vault's secondary wall, they recovered skeletal remains identified as Keene herself and, she hesitated, a boy's shoe belonging to Brian Caldwell. No other bodies were present. Instead, the chamber's interior was lined with plaster impressions, human-sized, like fossils pressed into concrete. The defense rose. Your Honor, this is hearsay at best. We're litigating ghosts. Ms. Keene died half a century ago. My clients are a school board, not a seance. The judge, an older man with weary eyes, leaned forward. Then explain, Mr. Howard, why your district poured fresh concrete over that site 2 weeks after the disappearance, without state authorization. Howard adjusted his tie. To stabilize subsidence, sir. The ground was collapsing, and yet, Abbott said, the engineer who signed that work order was a fictional name. The permit number doesn't exist in county records. Someone wanted that floor sealed, fast. The courtroom doors opened suddenly. 2 deputies entered, carrying a box marked Exhibit 47, Audio Evidence. Abbott gestured for them to connect the player. The recording clicked on, filling the room with faint static. Then Emma's voice echoed through the speakers. June 12th, 2024. Site appears altered. She went cold. The audio played everything, the voice that called the session to order, Brian's testimony, the hum. Gasps broke through the gallery. Keene shot her a sharp glance that said, "You never turned the mic off." The playback ended in a burst of distortion, followed by a whisper barely audible. She kept the record. Now you will. Abbott's voice was steady. We submit this recording as evidence that the phenomena at Brantford Elementary are not mechanical failure or chemical leak. They're the continuation of a deliberate act, one intended to contain something below ground. Ms. Keene's notes refer to the chalk line as a ritual of demarcation. The judge exhaled slowly. Are you implying intent of preservation or imprisonment? Abbott looked directly at Emma. Both. The fluorescent lights hummed like nerves stretched too thin. The room seemed to lean closer as Abbott continued, pacing before the jury box where local citizens sat stiff, uncertain whether they were judging a crime or a haunting. Emma's voice replayed faintly in her own head. June 12th, 2024. Altered. She wanted to believe the recording was corrupted by interference. Yet every word, every breath sounded too clean, as though the courthouse itself were wired to listen. The prosecutor set a weathered ledger on the table. Recovered from a locked cabinet beneath the south wing, she said. Margaret Keene's original attendance book, 1974. The pages were warped from moisture. Names trailed down in perfect script until the last week of September, where 5 were crossed out with chalk, not ink. At the bottom of the page, in a hand trembling but deliberate, Keene had written one line, "Lesson complete. Containment maintained." A murmur of unease ran through the benches. The defense objected, but the judge motioned them down. Overruled. Continue. Abbott nodded toward a young technician who wheeled forward a monitor. Static hissed. Then an image filled the screen. The reconstructed digital scan of the underground chamber. Every imprint, every wall. Keene leaned forward, jaw set. That's the main vault? The technician nodded. It's alive, sir. The concrete still gives off measurable heat, and he hesitated. The surface shifts every few hours. Like something breathing, Abbott folded her arms. And yet the site was re-poured last week. By whose order? The courtroom fell silent. The judge's gaze swept the room until it found Emma. Her throat closed. "Ms. Lane," Abbott said gently, "you were on site when the second pour occurred. Would you tell the court why?" Emma stood slowly. Her reflection in the defense table's polished surface looked older, washed out by sleepless nights. "Because it started again," she said quietly. "The ground was moving. I thought sealing it would stop it." Abbott stepped closer. "And did it?" "For a while." "What do you believe the chalk line is, Miss Lane?" She looked past the benches, toward the old wooden floor where chalk dust drifted from people's shoes. "A boundary," she said, "between memory and erasure, between what we can live with and what we bury." The judge's gavel came down softly. "Then perhaps this hearing is not about crime," he murmured, "but about confession." Rain began ticking against the tall windows. Somewhere beneath the courthouse, a faint vibration stirred, a low, steady hum that resonated through the floorboards. The clerk's pen trembled in her hand. Abbott whispered, "Do you feel that?" No one answered. The lights flickered once, twice. Then the old wooden panels between the benches creaked, a hairline crack spreading in a perfect straight line from the witness stand to the judge's bench. Chalk pale, dustless. The judge stared at it, lips parting. "Court," he said softly, "is adjourned." By dusk, the courthouse was cordoned off. Deputies taped the entrance while engineers argued about soil pressure and tremor readings. To the locals gathered behind barricades, the shaking was another omen, a repetition of history the town had buried in cement and silence. Emma watched from her car across the street. Her recorder lay on the dashboard, light blinking weakly. She hadn't replayed the inquest tape. Not yet. Part of her feared what the background might reveal. Detective Keene approached, rain beating on his jacket. "They've called in the state geologists," he said. "They're saying the subsidence is natural." Emma gave a faint laugh. "They said that in '74, didn't they?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the courthouse foundation where a hairline fissure had appeared, white against the soaked asphalt, cutting straight toward the square like chalk dragged across a blackboard. "You felt it too," he said quietly. Emma nodded. "It's not done." They walked toward the square as evening deepened. The fissure widened under the lamplight, veining across the cobblestones toward the river road. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet rebar and clay. At the edge of the square stood the old school bell, the one recovered from the ruins for the memorial. It began to sway gently in the still air. A single hollow note rolled through town. Then another. Emma turned on her recorder. June 13th, 2024. Seismic pattern replicating acoustic frequency from 1974 recording logs. "Stop narrating," Keene said. "Just listen." The sound wasn't just vibration. It carried rhythm. A 5-beat pulse, deliberate as a signature. The same cadence carved into the vault walls decades ago. Suddenly her phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. "The line's incomplete. Finish what she couldn't." She looked up. Across the street, the memorial lights flickered. Shadows gathered beneath the courthouse steps, forming the shape of a door. Keene saw it too. "No," he said under his breath. "We sealed it." Emma stepped closer anyway, drawn as though gravity had reversed. The crack in the street reached the base of the courthouse and stopped, glowing faintly beneath the stone threshold. A gust of cold air rushed out, papers scattered from benches inside, spiraling into the square like pale birds. Keene grabbed her arm. "If you go in there—" "It's already started," she whispered. "If I don't, someone else will." She crossed the tape, boots echoing against marble steps that felt too warm beneath her soles. The front doors groaned open. The courtroom was empty. benches coated with dust that hadn't been there that morning. The crack ran straight up the aisle to the bench, stopping at the gavel's base. The words "Court adjourned" were still chalked faintly on the board behind it. Only now, the line beneath them glowed gold. Emma raised the recorder. "Session resumed," she whispered. The corridor beneath the courthouse was colder than Emma remembered from the archives tour months before. Air thick, mineral, faintly humming with current. Keene followed close, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Each step echoed twice, as though something else walked in rhythm behind them. At the base of the stairs, the crack had widened into a trench. Pale dust framed its edges. Emma crouched, shining her light into the gap. The fissure ran deeper than any basement blueprints allowed, descending into soil that glimmered faintly like powdered glass. Keene's voice was low. "The whole building's sitting on a hollow." "No," she said, "on a record." Her recorder blinked red, catching the hum that now rose and fell like breath. The trench seemed to exhale warm air. It smelled of chalk and rust and something almost sweet. A scrap of paper fluttered past, one of the court transcripts. It landed in the crack, igniting for a moment in gold light before crumbling to ash. "They're rewriting," Emma murmured. "Who?" "Everyone who was buried under it." They reached the lower door, steel, rusted, half open from the earlier excavation. Keene tried the latch. It resisted, then gave way with a sigh. Inside lay the foundation chamber. Concrete pillars, ribs of rebar. The earth's skin peeled back to show its muscle. In the center, dust had gathered in a shape roughly human. Emma knelt. "Margaret Keene," she whispered. The shape was delicate, like the impression left by a body in plaster. At its chest, something faintly gleamed. A small rectangle of slate, the kind used for writing practice. On it, a final line of chalk. "Verdict pending." Keene rubbed the bridge of his nose. It's like she knew this day would come. "She didn't just teach them," Emma said. "She taught the ground to remember." The hum surged. The chalk on the slate flared, throwing light across the pillars. For a heartbeat, Emma saw outlines in the concrete. Dozens of figures pressed into the walls, mouths open in mid-sentence. Keene stepped back. "We have to leave." But Emma was already tracing the crack with her fingers. The dust vibrated beneath her touch, aligning into words. "Court in session." She felt the world tilt. Her vision blurred, the room expanding until the pillars stretched into gallery seats and the ceiling became sky. Keene's voice drifted through the air, calm, instructive. "Every lesson ends with review, Miss Lane. State your conclusion." Emma's throat tightened. "The chalk line isn't containment," she said slowly. "It's continuity. You draw it so the story doesn't disappear." The hum quieted. The crack sealed itself grain by grain until only smooth stone remained. Keene's flashlight flickered, then steadied. The chamber was silent. When they climbed back into the courtroom, dawn was breaking. The fissure across the floor was gone. The board behind the bench was blank, except for one faint mark, curved, unfinished. Keene holstered his light. "If anyone asks." Emma switched off her recorder. "Tell them the record's closed." Outside, sunlight touched the courthouse steps, turning the chalk dust to gold. For the first time in half a century, Brantford was still. Morning sunlight cut clean through the courthouse windows, scattering gold dust across the benches. For the first time since the inquest, the air felt still, as if the town had been holding its breath all night and finally let go. Emma sat in the witness gallery, notebook open, staring at the blank chalkboard that had once divided nightmare from evidence. Her recorder lay silent beside her. She hadn't turned it on since the vault sealed itself. Every instinct as a journalist told her to document, to gather proof. But she understood now that proof was the very thing that fed the chalk line. Each time someone recorded, each retelling hardened the story further into the earth. Detective Keene entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one, then leaned against the railing. The state's calling it a geological event. They'll close the courthouse for structural repairs. Then they'll build over it again. They always do, Emma said. Her voice was hoarse, almost gone. Keene glanced toward the chalkboard. You sure you want to stay in town? She shrugged. Leaving won't matter. The line's wherever we tell the story. He studied her face, then reached into his coat pocket. Found this in the vault before they sealed it. It was the small slate tablet, the one with verdict pending etched in chalk. The writing had faded, but when the light hit just right, another layer appeared beneath it. Faint letters, almost invisible. The next lesson begins above ground. Emma felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She knew the record would move. Keene sighed. Maybe it always does. He took a sip of coffee, then added, They're reopening Brantford High next fall. New wing, fresh concrete. She gave a thin, bitter smile. The ground never forgets a foundation. Outside, a school bell rang. Not real. The building was still empty, but faint, distant, traveling on the morning wind. Both of them turned toward the sound. Keene set his cup down carefully. You hear that? Yeah, she whispered. It's attendance. He frowned. What? She pointed toward the chalkboard. A new line had appeared, faint and wavering, drawn by no visible hand. Beside it, letters began to form, childlike, uneven. Name, Emma Lane. Status, present. The bell rang again. Emma closed her notebook, forcing herself to breathe. She's calling roll, she said. The lesson's not over. Keene's flashlight trembled as he pointed it toward the board. The new writing shimmered faintly, as if drawn with light instead of chalk. The words pulsed once, then settled into stillness. Emma, he said quietly. Step away. She didn't move. It's attendance, detective. You can't erase attendance. The air thickened around them. The courtroom's sunlight dimmed, replaced by a dull gray haze that seemed to breathe. Emma's reflection in the glass pane behind the bench began to shift, not copying her movements, but anticipating them. Do you feel that? She whispered. Keene nodded. Like a hum in my teeth. Then a second name appeared on the board beneath hers. Harold Keene. Status, absent. The letters burned briefly, then faded into dust that drifted toward the floor. Keene stepped back, a look of sudden understanding in his eyes. It's rewriting us, he said. Finishing the roll call. Emma turned on her recorder. The red light flared weakly to life. June 14th, she said, voice shaking. The chalk line persists in recursive manifestation, each generation drawn into the record. The board hissed. A crack formed across it, chalk bleeding light. Turn that thing off, Keene shouted. It's feeding on the sound. She hesitated. The light grew stronger. Her voice layered back from the recorder, echoing a half-second behind her words. Each repetition louder, sharper. Emma looked at him, her face pale but calm. If I stop recording, the story seals without a witness. It'll start again somewhere else. And if you keep recording? Her thumb hovered over the stop button. Then I finish it. The building groaned. The walls flexed, dust falling in slow curtains. Beneath their feet, the faint heartbeat of the earth began again. Slow, deliberate, a pulse as old as the quarry itself. Keene took a step toward her, but the floor between them split, a narrow crack running in a straight white line. Chalk dust rose in thin spirals. Emma? She met his eyes. Every lesson needs closure. The recorder's light blinked faster. She whispered one final note. Verdict rendered. Record closed. Then she pressed stop. The hum stopped with it. Silence rolled through the courthouse like a windless tide. The crack sealed over, leaving only smooth stone. The chalkboard stood blank once more. Keene blinked, heart hammering. "Emma!" She was gone. Her notebook lay open on the witness stand, one line written across the page in careful script. Some lessons stay buried until someone dares to write them again. Outside, morning returned. Blue sky, calm air, the sound of children playing somewhere beyond the square. The courthouse stood silent, its foundation steady. For now. A year later, the town of Brantford looked new. The courthouse had been rebuilt, its facade scrubbed clean of soot and story. A glass addition gleamed on the west side, all sunlight and reflection. No trace of the old vault, no hint of the chalk line that had once split its floor. Developers called the project proven ground. The mayor called it a rebirth. The news called it closure. In the evenings, when the crews shut off their floodlights, the new foundation would glow faintly beneath the glass, an afterimage no camera could capture. Engineers said it was mineral reflection from the quarry sand used in the mix. No one noticed that the shimmer pulsed in a 5-beat rhythm. Detective Harold Keene retired 2 months after the rebuild. He moved north, bought a cabin by a lake, tried not to think about classrooms or courtrooms or cracks that glowed. But some nights, when he closed his eyes, he heard chalk squealing faintly against a board just beyond the edge of sleep. A letter arrived that spring. No return address. Just his name written in a looping, practiced hand. Inside was a single Polaroid. The new courthouse lobby. Empty, early morning light slicing across the marble. In the reflection of the glass wall, a woman stood, her hair loose, her recorder raised. On the back of the photo, in faint pencil, attendance complete, lesson archived. E.L. Keene set the picture face down and poured himself another cup of coffee. He didn't try to explain it. Some things didn't want explaining. Some stories ended by being written, others by being sealed. Across the valley, the new elementary school stood finished. Bright paint, green turf, proud ribbon-cutting smiles. On its playground, someone had drawn a hopscotch grid in white chalk. The last square stretched too long, ending in a curve rather than a line. The children laughed, played, moved on. A breeze carried a bit of chalk dust into the air, where it shimmered gold for just a moment before disappearing. In the courthouse basement, sealed behind tempered glass, the original slate tablet from 1974 sat on display under the exhibit title, The Chalk Line, a local mystery. Visitors leaned close, reading the faint grooves carved into its surface. They never noticed the newest addition at the bottom edge. Letters too small to see without leaning close, as if whispered by the stone itself. The next lesson begins when you read these words. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere deep below Brantford, the ground gave a long, contented sigh.